Hello and welcome to the Disciplines and Ideas in the Social Sciences. I am Armin Rose and I will be your guide as you learn the concepts in this course. This is the introduction to the dominant approaches in the study of the social sciences. In this class, we will tackle 9 dominant approaches or theories used to explain the ideas studied in the various social science disciplines. We will also study the indigenous or local theories attempted by Filipino social scientists to explain the nuances of Filipino thought, behavior, and culture. I will give a brief explanation of the major concepts of each approach in this video, and we will study each of these in depth in the next lessons. All the approaches discussed in this lesson will fall under either of the 2 categories. A macro theory attempts to make a generalized assumption or explanation about thoughts, behaviors, or events that is experienced by a majority of people. A microtheory attempts to explain how thoughts, behaviors, or events are processed by individuals as it happens to them. The first approach is structural functionalism. It is a macro theory, often attributed to Emil Durkheim, Herbert Spencer, and Max Weber. Structural functionalism is a form of systems theory taken from the natural sciences. Systems theory explains that the whole is made up of interrelated parts that perform different roles. The focus of structural functionalism is maintaining equilibrium. That means when change happens, all adaptation is aimed in restoring the balance of society. Structural functionalism talks about functions, or the use of the different parts of the system. Manifest functions are commonly recognized functions, while latent functions are not commonly recognized, but are sometimes the real reason the structure exists. For example, a school's manifest function is to teach the lessons of each subject. The latent functions is to teach the child cooperation, independence, and critical thinking, which are not directly stated in the curriculum. These functions are actions that break down the system and cause conflict. So when someone or something in the system is not doing their function, it is called a dysfunction. And the role of social control, whether formal or informal, is to maintain the status quo. Formal social control comes in the forms of laws, while informal social control is done through socialization. Conflict theory is a macro theory attributed to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. It talks about the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis cycle. The thesis is a dominant idea held by the ruling class. The antithesis is an idea perpetuated by the working class. The thesis and the antithesis are in conflict with each other back and forth until such time that they form a synthesis, an idea that will benefit both parties. The synthesis will eventually become the thesis until an antithesis emerges. The social structure of a society is dependent on its economic base. All other aspects of culture are superstructures developed over the mode of production. This means that, like a house, the economic base or the working class is the foundation of the social structure, and all the other groups are superstructures or the house that is formed over the economic base. The ruling class is the class which has the means of production at its disposal and has control at the same time over the dominant viewpoint that pervades the culture. Symbolic Interactionism is a microtheory attributed to George Herbert Mead and Herbert Blumer. It states that people act based on meanings they find within a given situation. This means that 2 people in the same situation will form different meanings to the situation and will act differently based on the meaning they have created. The goals of our interactions are to create a shared meaning. Symbolic Interactionism works on three basic principles: meaning, language, and thought. Symbolic Interactionism has only one variable in it: the individual. The individual has its own set of meanings for things and people. The individual is composed of the self, and the self is a combination of I and me. The I refers to what is unpredictable and unorganized about the self, while the me is the image of the self as we want others to see us. Symbolic Interactionism talks about the looking glass self and the generalized other. The looking glass self says we develop who we are based on ideas that come from imagining how we look to another person. And the generalized other means it is a combination of all the looking glass selves that others gives us. Psychoanalysis is a macro theory attributed to Sigmund Freud. It was created using his therapy called free association. Psychoanalysis talks about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind works through dreams and Freudian slips, while the conscious mind is the one where we have awareness of our actions. The mind is divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is governed by the pleasure principle. The ego handles our cognitive and intellectual processes, and the superego acts as our conscience. Rational choice is a micro-theory which states that people calculate the risks involved in their actions. It talks about the importance of reward and punishment when making decisions. Institutionalism is a macro theory. It states that institutions are structures and mechanisms of social order and cooperation governing the behavior of a set of individuals within a given human collectivity. Institutions have social purpose and permanence, transcending individual human lives and intentions, and with the making and enforcing of rules governing cooperative human behavior. Feminism is a macro theory attributed to Mary Wollstonecraft. Feminism is a form of conflict theory, but it transposes the ruling class and the working class by men and women. The ruling class are the men, and the working class are the women. In simplest terms, feminism is the theory that women and men should be equal politically, economically, and socially. The first wave of feminism started in the 16th century by the suffragettes, or the women who fought for the right to vote. The second wave of feminism started from the 1960s up to the 1980s. It talks about gender inequality in laws and culture, the sexist and patriarchal structure of power, and other feminist issues which include reproductive rights, domestic violence, maternity leave, equal pay, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual discrimination. Phenomenology is a microtheory attributed to Immanuel Kant and Edmund Husserl. It states that all events are made of two things: the noumenon, which is the thing itself, and the phenomenon, which is the thing as it appears in our consciousness. Phenomenology turns inwards to investigate human reflection, consciousness, and subjectivity, and poses the question of how a particular experience stands out, or appears to become significant that we would grant them attention, intention, and consciousness. Phenomenology talks about the stream of consciousness. This is the idea that our mind is working all the time, even when we sleep, and talks about intentionality, or our thoughts should be intentional. We choose the thoughts that run through our stream of consciousness. It also talks about the importance of perception, retention, and reproduction of memory. The concept of action is experiences endowed with meanings in the form of a project which consists of anticipated goals and intentions and efforts to fulfill them. The human environment systems is a macro-theory, which is also a form of systems theory. It focuses on sustainability and conservation of ecosystem and society. It states that the humans and environment have a mutual relationship with each other. The future health of both human populations and natural systems depends on the two-way interaction between the human systems and our environment. What humans do influences the environment, but the resulting changes in the environment in turn influence our perceptions and behavior. Finally, we have the indigenous ideas of the social sciences. In the Philippines, we've developed local representations of social sciences that are not only translations, but are actual applications in the Filipino culture. We have Agham Panlipunang Pilipino, or the Philippine Social Science, Pantayong Pananaw for philosophy, Bagong Kasaysayan for history, Pilipinolohiya for anthropology, Psikolohiyang Pilipino for psychology. And these were started in the 1970s by Zeus Salazar, Prospero Covar, and Virgilio Enriquez. These ideas states that only Filipinos will be able to explain what it is like to be a Filipino and give meaning to our culture and behavior. Western ideas can only explain a part of the Filipino culture, but not all of it, hence the need for indigenization. That is it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.